Hey everyone, my name's Atol. I'm an Android developer at Monzo. I'm glad Anna mentioned about audience participation because this talk has a lot of audience participation. I noticed a few faces just turning that smile upside down, but don't worry, I'm not expecting there to be much effort involved. I'm just going to ask a few questions. They're going to be simple questions, yes/no answers. You don't need to raise your hand fully or do anything crazy. I know that some people don't like to lift their hands past their heads, especially this late in the evening. So any sort of subtle hints that you can give to me that you're either in the affirmative or the negative would be really helpful. Leading on from that, I would really appreciate the feedback, jokes aside, because one, it's going to help me during the talk. As I'm going through things, I can see if I need to spend a bit longer on some things, or I can speed through a bit. And secondly, a lot of the things I'm talking about are things that we're trying at Monzo, and we haven't quite nailed it yet. So any sort of feedback from what you're doing in your day-to-day work will be really helpful for me. My email's here, my Twitter DMs are open, so please send feedback. I started at Monzo about 10 months ago as an Android developer, but it wasn't there that I learned too much about inclusive design. Prior to that, I was at a company called Navoda, which was a product agency for about 5 years. I worked on lots of different projects, and some people here today I worked learning about inclusive design and accessibility. And I learned, one of the most important things I learned is that inclusive design or accessibility, it's not necessarily about making your app or your digital products working with users with disabilities, but instead framing the question some other way. Like if we ask the question, are we releasing a digital product that actually excludes some users from being able to enjoy or use our services? Is that something that we can learn from and decide how to improve? One of the questions I get, so I've been talking a lot about the implementation and how accessibility works from a technical point of view and a design point of view over the last few years, but I haven't really been talking about how you can get started. So this is one of the questions that I get a lot at the end of my talks. For me, it's just been a case of getting started, just start. How hard is it? And when I started at Monzo, I realized that it is actually quite hard. One of the most important things that you can do today is try to understand what your goals and your aims are. So for me, it was not necessarily to have a fully accessible app today, tomorrow, or even in the next month, but for everyone in the company to have a basic understanding of what accessibility is and why it's important, and two, to have a consideration. So when they're designing and making decisions, or when they're implementing designs and deciding what needs to be in first and foremost, they can understand that first we need to make it functional and then we can iterate on it. And one of the ways to do that, to get this company-wide understanding, is to make sure that all of our communication about inclusive design is in the open. Who here uses Slack? Does anyone not use Slack? Of these people, so keep your hands up if you don't use Slack. Of these people, put your hands down if you know what Slack is. Perfect. I've prepared for this. So Slack is an online collaboration tool. It's used primarily for sending messages, it's like a chat room basically. You can send messages one-to-one, and you can also create channels or groups where you can talk about a specific topic in that specific group, and people can join and leave groups as and when needed. Before I started Monzo, 2 weeks before, I got access to the Monzo Slack, and it was I was really excited to see that there was an accessibility channel. And unlike the accessibility channels that I've seen in the past, this one had actually some content in it. That wasn't just Slackbot asking you if you wanted to archive the room because there was no content. This room is really important, or this channel is really important in the company because, one, it's a place where our customer service representatives can escalate customer queries. So if they're not sure about something, or if there's something that's gone wrong with the product, either the iOS or the Android app, and the customer's having difficulty performing something that they could previously do, or they're telling us about something that they can't do and they should be able to do, these queries will be directed here, and then they'll go back down to the different product teams. You'll see the purpose here is, at the top is knowledge, ideas, and issues. So we discuss issues, but the other part is for people to share about events, meetups that they're going to in the community. So they organize groups and go together, and also asking questions about how they can do something and whether they should be considering certain things when they're designing. We get escalations also via social. So one nice way for us to integrate or add more people into the channel, like get them more involved, is to ask questions and then tag them in. So here we had Monzo released a TV advert recently, and on YouTube it wasn't subtitled. So there were some really fast phrases being thrown around, and Google does its best with its algorithms to caption the content. One of the captions said something about someone's mother, and that wasn't what we were trying to go for. So I asked if we could add captions. The next day, captions were added. We involved marketing, and now they're in the channel as well. Some of the things that I learned from years of being in accessibility channels on Slack or at Monzo as well. Number one, don't do it alone. So you don't want the channel to become your personal Twitter, where people are just reading stuff. You want everyone to be contributing, at least do it with a small group, where either you discuss it offline and there's people taking turns to post interesting links sparking discussions, or you start a smaller channel like a DM or something, and then once you've got enough people that it's useful for others, then you can open it up to more people. Secondly, remember that it's a welcoming space. It's tempting, especially if you're familiar with accessibility, to focus on trying to make sure everything that's mentioned in the channel is correct, but it's not a place where you're trying to assert your knowledge on other people. It's more important to encourage the enthusiasm and involvement of others so that everyone can learn together. Remember, the aim is for the whole company to be aware of accessibility considerations and also to consider them at a product level. And lastly, make sure there's varied content. Does anyone use Pocket? So Pocket is like this graveyard, I guess, where you put links that you want to read at one point. So you put them in Pocket, and the intention is that you're going to read them later. Don't let this channel become your Pocket. Make sure that there's discussions or you're asking questions to people. You're not just trying to dump a link in there and then go away. We also have this convention where we create short-lived channels with specific goals. So we've got this convention saying if you prefix a channel name with TMP, short for temp, it's intended that this channel is going to close down at one point. This is one that I created earlier this year called Improving Accessibility. And the intention here was for a small group of mobile developers and a small group of designers to get the ball rolling on identifying what's the big things that we need to fix, what's the easy things that we can fix today, and starting that conversation going. It's closed now. We also have a company all hands. So Monzo, from its beginning, like way before I started, when there was 10 people, every week they used to hold a company all hands. All hands being a meeting where everyone in the company attends. And the format has not really changed. I think it started when they're in someone's flat and eventually they had to go into the car park to do the meeting. Now we've got our event space and everyone joins. People from around the world join because we live stream on YouTube. And the format is employees that want to address the company can book some time in, and at the end there's a Q&A session with one of the C-level executives. Earlier this year, me and Natalie, so Natalie is like the accessibility champion at Monzo. She works on the vulnerable customers team, which is a team where they look at people not just with disabilities, but with issues like gambling addiction, people who can't manage their own money, or people who are at risk of basically not being able to have fiscal responsibility. So Natalie's really passionate about accessibility, and one thing that we wanted to do together was raise this concept to the rest of the company. So we got up at the all hands, we told people about the channel, and we gave people a really short, really succinct description of what accessibility was and what we were hoping to achieve in the coming months. Firstly, when you're addressing a company like Monzo, which is growing bigger and bigger and bigger all the time, or even when you're addressing a company that's got 5 people or 10 people, you want to keep your message short. No one really likes accessibility, like in terms of if they're not familiar with it and they don't understand its importance in the grand scheme of things, then it's a distraction for them, or it's a nice to have. If you keep it short and you keep if you keep it short and you keep the effort that they need to expend listening to you small, then they're going to be much more receptive to the message. Secondly, when you're addressing a company, the whole company, make sure you've got a call to action, like something that you want them to do as a result of you having told them this message. For us, it was very simple. It was just join this Slack channel with the intention of you're going to be exposed to these new concepts. You'll be considering the things that you need to consider when you're designing for accessibility and inclusive design. And lastly, you're going to see the customer escalation. So these people are building this app every day. They should be aware of the difficulties that some customers have with the product that we're building. And finally, set expectations and keep them small. Like, if you ask someone to do something and they're not entirely sure what that thing is, they're going to be very reluctant to do it because 1, they don't know how to start, and 2, they don't know if you're going to keep asking and asking and asking. For us, it was very simple, like just join the channel and read it. Just keep an eye on it. The thing we started, one of the other things that we had to do was get buy-in from multiple disciplines. I spoke to our VP of Design, Hugo Cornejo, and he suggested maybe there's something informal that we can do with the designers. The designers have this weekly session called the Lunch and Learn, where during lunchtime they spend half an hour grabbing their lunch and they come into a meeting room and then they talk with each other. One of them suggested that I can take over this knowledge share session. Excuse me. It's called Mobile Takeover. I'm not sure if I'm happy with the name because I didn't want it to make it feel like I'm taking over their time or their space. But I was really grateful for the opportunity. And it was really informal. We just took screenshots of the app in various settings, like for example with dynamic type or large text switched on, and highlighted these are the different things that we need to think about when we're implementing the apps and designing the apps. And at the end, the action was for us to work together on it. So myself and Xander Brad, who's a product designer, a senior product designer on the design team, the outcome from that meeting was for us to work together to ask for help from a different product area and come up with a checklist of things that the designers need to consider when they're looking at making a new screen. Is there a checklist that they can follow to make sure that they've considered everything? When you're working with these other disciplines, especially if you don't interact with them a lot, it conducive to work on their schedule. So especially if you're asking for the time of multiple people, finding a time that works for them rather than you setting up a time that works for you is going to be easier for everyone, and they're going to be happier that they haven't disrupted themselves for you. And again, lead with actions. So every meeting that you want to have some clear actions at the end. This one I wasn't looking forward to. The product owners at Monzo, I thought there was about 5 of them. So I was preparing my talk, I was making my introduction, and then I went into a boardroom and there's about 15 of them. But I was pleasantly surprised. So on the right-hand side, we've got Lindsay Jane, our VP of Product. She was really passionate about accessibility as well. So she came into the accessibility channel and asked, is there someone we can come get externally who can give us, like the PMs, some 101 on what accessibility is, what sort of things should we be looking for? She led a group of designers and other people who were interested to the government digital services, government empathy lab or something. It's like a place where designers and product owners can go to understand how different people use digital products. And this invitation was really nice because coming into this meeting, you can see it was a bunch of PMs, like everything was super organized. It wasn't flaky or anything. There was very specific time slots that everyone had to stick to. At the beginning, they would go around and they would say what's been bothering them that week. It didn't necessarily have to be with work, but things that were stressing them out or things that they were happy with, like things that they were considering as a whole that might affect their work one way or the other. Afterwards, again, at the end, there's about 20-minute slot where someone can present something. It doesn't need to be about work. I think Moshe, the fellow at the back left, presented something about why Frozen's, what's that song called? How does it go again? Okay. So this song, Let It Go from Frozen, how it's the best song in the world. And he gave like a 20-minute detailed, convincing speech about how good it is. So it was difficult to follow that, but I tried. And everyone seemed really appreciative, like they were engaged, they were listening. They gave me feedback at the end. So the last thing that they do during the session is they take Post-its. I didn't know what was going on. They take Post-its and they write something like, thank you for X, Y, Z, and then they give it to each other. And I thought it was some PM thing. And I got some nice Post-its at the end, which was nice. And then someone took one away because one wasn't meant for me. But that's fine. One of the things I learned from that was customize your content for who you're speaking to, especially when it comes to accessibility. They're not necessarily going to care too much about the nitty-gritty of how everything needs to work. They want to know about how it's going to affect them. So one of the things I brought up was how can we prioritize work when we're thinking about accessibility. We can use analytics, for example. We can check if the drop-off rate during a flow is greater or lower if a user has a certain accessibility setting on. If the user has large text on and they're dropping off at a much earlier rate in the funnel than a user without large text, does that mean there's something wrong on that screen that we need to focus on to fix? Follow up with the keenos. Does anyone know what a keno is? So a keno is someone who's really keen. One of them came after me after the session, and I think this is public. I hope this is public. I think it is public. So there is a new navigation in Monzo in the app, and he was like, we haven't really checked if it's accessible yet, so we're redesigning the UI or parts of the UI. We haven't checked if it's accessible yet, but we're just trying it out with a few users. Is it okay? Like, how do we know? I go, well, no, it's not accessible. Like, I tried it out. But it's great because now we've set up some action points. He's pulled in more designers into his team. He's pulled in more engineers into his team, and they're looking at that over the coming weeks. And finally, get feedback. So depending on who you're talking to, you're going to want different feedback. A reminder, please give me feedback. Next, considering the last interaction I had with the designers was very informal, I wanted to try like a workshop-y type thing. So a lot of the designers hadn't used a screen reader before. A screen reader being an assistive technology that blind or very vision impaired users use to get information from their screen and interact with their device. We kept the group small. There was about 7 people. It was difficult, I would say, but fun. It was really useful having someone else who knew what they were talking about as well in the session that could help you facilitate it. Designers, okay, put your hand up if you've got an iPhone. Put your hands down. Put your hands up if you've got an Android phone. Okay. Well, 99% of designers at Monzo have an iPhone. And being an Android developer, I wasn't the best place to talk about how to navigate a device using VoiceOver, the screen reader on iOS, as I would be with TalkBack on Android. This is Dylan, one of our iOS engineers. He's really, he's a keenos with accessibility, and he was able to explain things, and then the nice thing was they were able to explain to each other when they got stuck. For example, Paul explaining to someone else. Keep the group small. I think that group was too big. There was 7 of us. Keep the groups balanced in terms of Android and iOS, for example, if you're going to do a practical workshop, because you don't want one person to be on an Android phone, as there was, and everyone else on iOS, because that person feels like pointless coming to that session because everyone else is moving along, helping each other, and they're by themselves. Bring help if you can, and be clear with the equipment that you want people to bring. I apparently didn't tell people to bring a phone. I did, but some people thought it was okay to bring a phone that didn't have a working speaker, so I needed to be more clear with that. Also, if you're testing or if you're doing a workshop with a screen reader where it's chatting at you, maybe it's helpful to have headphones. I went to a meetup earlier this year where the speaker asked everyone to whip out their phones and turn on TalkBack, like the screen reader. And there was one person that got loud and unruly. He was like, okay, turn it off. Everyone turns it off. He carries on talking, and there's one person at the back saying, double tap to activate, double tap to activate. He's like, I'm sorry, I can't turn it off. So he had to leave. It's fine. This one was more in my forte, so mobile screen readers with the Android engineers. The Android engineers at Monzo are fantastic. A lot of them want to know more about accessibility, want to know what they should be looking out for when they're doing code reviews. We had another session, so you'll see I learned from the feedback I got from the previous session. At a smaller group, I asked everyone to bring their headphones, but there's another problem with asking everyone to bring headphones. When everyone puts their headphones on, no one's listening to you. So maybe earphones where you can leave one in, one out. Phil got the right idea, he's the one with the Coke. Again, like the nice surprising thing was you get to find people that know about the subjects that you didn't know knew about the subject. So Sarah on the right hand side is explaining to Emma how she's worked with this technology before, what she did with it, what she looks out for. So it was nice. Like, I didn't think I had anyone to help with this session, but Sarah was there. And it was fun watching people get competitive with each other, trying to make it harder for themselves. So obviously, when a vision impaired user is using a screen reader, they're using it because they can't really see very well. And if you're testing it out and you can see what's on the screen, it's cheating. So you can turn off the screen. And I was like, you can if you want to. And then everyone wanted to. And then this person couldn't get the screen back on. And we've also got remote employees. So one of the things that was really important is to make sure that they're still engaged and up to date, because when people are in the same room as you, you can keep tabs on them, making sure that everyone's at the same stage. But the people who are remote, especially if you're giving a presentation at the same time or switching between a demo and a presentation, you have to also keep an eye on these people to make sure that they're not forgotten about. Like, has anyone worked remotely or worked from home? Do you feel sometimes lonely or forgotten about? We all feel it. So one thing I'd recommend with this is bringing a second screen that you can connect to the same Hangout or the video conference with. That way you can keep glancing to them just in case they need anything. So support remote workers. Keep the groups small, smaller than you think. So I think 4 to 6 people for one person is manageable as long as you've got a good understanding of what you're trying to teach. So for example, for me, I wouldn't be inviting back iOS users unless I had someone else. And make sure you chase people for feedback, and it needs to be timely. So in this case, I gave people a Google form to fill out. I had very descriptive questions and like very open-ended questions as well. The intention was that people would be able to fill it out within the next few days. Everything was optional, so we're trying to reduce the obstacles for people to give feedback. And we're trying to remind them to do it early, otherwise they're going to forget how it was. The last thing that we did, this was a few weeks ago, was the company all hands again. So I gave everyone homework. So these people haven't had homework in a long time, like 10 years or 20, 30, 40 years for some of them. So when you're standing up there and giving 1,000 people homework, it's not the, well, people laugh because you're giving them homework, but it needs to be very quick and very short, as we mentioned before. So in this particular case, what I wanted was feedback. So we've got a large company, we've got the capacity to get a lot of feedback internally, so we should use it. In this particular case, I wanted to get an understanding of how large text in our app, how well it was supported. So I asked everyone to whip out their phones, put the text to the largest size possible, and keep it like that for a week, if they could. Anytime they spied an issue, I wanted them to take a screenshot, upload it to a channel in Slack that I'd made earlier. I didn't need them or want them to describe any of the issues. I didn't need them to say what phone they were using, what version, etc. I would handle all of that after the fact. Like, we're trying to reduce the friction to get any sort of involvement. The more people that we get involvement from, the more likely they are to come back and help us in the future. So it's something small to keep the momentum going. Keep the requests small, otherwise people won't be doing them. And when you do get the feedback and you do get the involvement and engagement, show appreciation. What takeaways do we have? I think we've got 8. Keep the session small. Encourage enthusiasm over correctness. So again, this is trying to prioritize getting people involved over showing people that you're right. There is no right way. Chase people for feedback. You can be particularly brutal about this because they've already helped you, so keep messaging short, otherwise you'll lose their interest. Eliminate as much friction as possible to make it easy for them to fulfill your requests. Show appreciation. Thanks everyone for listening. Ask people for help. 1 second. And alternate between small and frequent things and big and infrequent things, because you're going to get tired, you're going to get other work, basically. So you want to keep the momentum going, but you also need to do big bursts of work as well. So going back to number 7, ask for help. Please send me feedback. Thank you.